In March of 2017, Breath of the Wild came out as a Switch exclusive, and in September of 2020, 4 years after, Genshin Impact hit PCs, Android, iPhones, and PlayStation 4, and shortly after, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox consoles. But why am I talking about these two games in particular? This opening scene was one of the first hints to players of what was deemed similarities between the two. Besides this, and this, and this, the list goes on. In 2020, people compared the mechanics of Genshin Impact to Breath of the Wild, claiming it was a clone, aka it had copied a Nintendo Switch exclusive. The company that made Genshin Impact, HoYoverse, formerly known as MiHoYo, is a China-based company that established itself in 2011. While Nintendo, the Japan-based company behind the Zelda series, has a long-standing history, starting in 1889 and being officially founded in 1933. While the measure of success of these two games can't be compared in the same way, the question is, why are we even trying? In garnering their success, Genshin and Breath of the Wild have two very big differences. Breath of the Wild was a one-time purchase in its first year of $59.99. Well, of course, later having DLCs and expansion passes and sales, blah blah, Breath of the Wild has earned itself $3 billion. The success only began to plateau in 2023. On the other hand, Genshin Impact is a gacha game. You know, the crab claw game. A gacha game is those tiny spear gifts next to those. Same concept. Hope to get the one you want. Probably won't. But don't worry, no skill involved. For better or worse. Turn dial, or in Genshin Impact's case, press a button, and you'll never know what you'll get. Complete 1% luck.
To lose the 50-50, you are a terrible person for saying that. If Chi greets me on any of these polls, you don't want to know what's going to happen. I'm going to quit Genshin.
Genshin has to make a pity system. Eventually, though, spend enough money, and you can get every character that you do actually want. As some people would call it, it's a cash grab. And that's exactly what it is. Genshin is highly often on the top charts against other mobile games, as far as revenue earned. In the month of January, earning almost $100,000 alone, having earned almost $6 billion total over time. Even now, it competes with another Nintendo game, Pokemon's latest TCG card game. And that's not the only way it competes. Genshin Impact has patches. No, not the normal bug patch you're thinking of, though that is a part of it. I guess it would be better to call them updates or seasons. Genshin is currently in its 5.3 update. Last month would have been 5.2. And generally, every month there's a new banner where people pull for characters. That is where these two systems, gacha and patches, combine to keep a consistent player base. Of course, not every patch is going to appeal to every person. Numbers dwindle, some come back next patch, some people lose interest altogether. Losing interest is even more likely with games like Breath of the Wild. While there is that nostalgic feel people get to come back to a game, for the most part, once a player feels that they have finished everything, whether that be exploring all the world, achievement hunting, speedrunning, or just finishing the story, people then move on and hope for a sequel. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom came out 2023. A highly anticipated game, but it ended up not being what everyone wanted, having 10 million less sales than its predecessor. With its patches, Genshin has the ability to continue on its story on the same platform, every sequel/chapter being something players finish and decide if they like. If they don't like it, they're incented to finish anyway. Primal Gems! For completing things in a game, some players urge themselves to be as free-to-play, not dropping $1,000 on the game, as possible, or not spending a single dollar at all. Instead choosing to grind out missions and stories to get these Primal Gems, which allow them to pull for characters. Genshin's system allows for even more of these games to be needed to pull for weapons, artifacts, and a bunch of other stuff. And they continue to earn even more for this system with their two other games, Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero. As far as popularity, these two games have recently moved Genshin out of its top 10 ranking spot for mobile games that it held for years. Though Genshin was MiHoYo's best hit, it was not their first game. Honkai Impact 3rd was also a gacha game, with a very different UI. Its downfall in popularity has let its characters' designs now be repurposed into other games. As of recent, its UI has been updated to look closer to its favored counterpart. As MiHoYo's second game, Genshin's success might have partially been propelled by its controversy with Nintendo, which has a history of suing games that come too close to its image. So much so that it's become a fun pastime to bet what game is most in danger and keep track. Of course, this isn't always the case, as you can see with the thriving success of Genshin Impact. So, what is the difference between likeness that verges on copying and inspiration? To answer that, let me take you back to the year 1996. These are both games and shows that are highly recognized across the world. One, maybe a bit more than the other. Digimon's first game, Digimon World, came out 3 years later in 1999, while first coming out in a different format before that, as a Tamagotchi game in 1997, and Pokemon being a TCG only after the video game. Both of their video games still had similar systems. And just like their systems having been similar, since their initial making, people have continued to call Digimon a copycat of Pokemon. So while it's common for people to think of Pokemon as its own game, generally when you bring up Digimon, the response will be,
I know absolutely nothing about Digimon. Pokemon is my entire life.
At the same time, you don't hear people calling Pokemon a knockoff of Magic the Gathering for being a TCG monster collector after they were. Why? Because they branched out. They got popular, if not to say necessarily more, in different genres and in a different demographic. Digimon would be considered a likeness. It has its own story, world, reasoning, and even takes into reference its Tamagotchi origin. It's branched out as more of a visual novel and has its own evolution system, which some people prefer, totally not me. Meanwhile, Palworld, as I mentioned before, has been accused of using many of the same models of existing and very well-known Pokemon, as well as similar mechanics. Its difference in battle systems is probably the only thing keeping it afloat right now. And as shown by the article, certain patents Pokemon has, like throwing the Pokeball, were infringed upon, and Palworld has since gotten rid of them. Though people love Pokemon, it has often lacked in one thing: not having enough of it. ROMs, or ready-only memory games, are digital copies of the game that can be played on mobile games, so people can edit them and make fan-made Pokemon games using its older versions to create more Pokemon, creating whole new stories, giving people a different version of an already beloved format. Examples like these are why today you'll rarely ever hear people revert to calling Genshin Impact a copy of any game, and instead, other games are being accused of copying Genshin. While Genshin is, of course, free to copy its own UI system without scrutinization, since people like being able to know the familiar grinding system to level up their characters, apparently other game companies also like that system. Wuthering Waves was called a copycat for not only having a similar art style, but for its distinct UI, despite its unique system of capturing bosses and monsters, which sets the game apart from Genshin at least. The label of clone and Genshin-like has gotten a little out of hand. Games that haven't even come out yet are being called Genshin clones, forcing them to promise unreasonable demands at the cost of, well, probably failing. I really doubt I'm going to be able to race, gamble, steal, party, skateboard, play volleyball, basketball, darts, go to the gym, and apparently be Spider-Man and whatever the world that is, all while having a full story and fighting system with bosses in a free-to-play game. No matter how many people complain and call clone, people like similar games. It's why we separate games into genres, so people can find the games they like quicker. Also, don't start with me, but every single farming sim beat a Stardew, like even ones that came out before Stardew. Gamers like to play games they feel have a similar feel, because they feel they're continuing the content. Just like when Among Us, Lethal Company, Into the Backrooms, and of course, Pokemon. Books, songs, movies, shows, and games take inspiration from one another. Systems get reused, and the more they get used, the more likely they are to turn into a type of game genre, like Metroidvania. How's that song go again? Every beautiful song's been already sung, so I guess right now here's another one. Though cheesy and old, Selena was right. There are only so many new ideas out there, and so people are instead combining previous ideas to make something new. They gather inspiration from games they already think are great, and other people love, consume, and find impactful.